Hello, everyone. This is Karol Kaczmarek, co-founder of Net Zero Compare. Today, we are speaking with someone whose work connects accessibility, open standards, digital service quality, and sustainable web practices. These areas play a growing role in how organizations build the digital systems they rely on for climate reporting, regulatory compliance, emissions data, and ESG documentation. A key part of sustainability is digital sustainability. This includes how platforms are built, the energy they require, and how accessible they are for all users. Our guest today is Mike Gifford, Open Standards and Practices Lead at CivicActions. He's a longtime accessibility advocate, Drupal core accessibility maintainer, IAAP member, which is International Association of Accessibility Professionals, CPWA member, which is Certified Professional in Web Accessibility, and a W3C expert. W3C stands for World Wide Web Consortium. That's quite an impressive list. He has contributed to the W3C Sustainable Web Standards and Guidelines, a framework focused on reducing the environmental impact of digital services. Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Carol. It's lovely to chat.
You have worked for years on an open standards in public sector digital services. Why should companies that focus on climate reporting, compliance, or ESG care about open standards?
Ultimately, it's about transparency. How do we make sure that what we're saying is something that can be verified and backed up? How do we try and make sure that we're able to establish trust, make sure that there's the ability to have reproducible information and data, and also how do we make sure that in our processes that we're able to build trust with our clients, with the regulators, with if people have transparency that they can rerun the tests, evaluate the information, that best practices are being followed, then it's not going to be just another compliance step. It's going to be something where people actually understand and believe that your organization is doing the best it can to try and meet these best practices.
Many organizations still view open standards as something optional, so this gives the right context.
They might be optional in some jurisdictions, but there's more and more places where these standards are being regulated.
Especially in North America and EU.
Yes.
So CivicActions works closely with government agencies. Where do you see private companies struggling the most when government expectations for digital reporting increase?
I think that it depends on where you are. And I think that the corporations have in some ways have a requirement to be defensive in terms of their address, looking at accessibility issues and sustainability as well. There's reporting requirements that are required. Part of it's just trying to ensure that, like in the U.S., so much of accessibility is driven by lawsuits. And are you doing the best that you can to make sure that you're not going to risk the possibility of a lawsuit coming against your company? I think that's less of an issue in Europe, although even there with the European Accessibility Act, we're seeing regulators come in and say that there's a to deal with complaints and concerns around accessibility. We're seeing this in France with the one of the grocery stores, or one or more of the grocery stores had accessibility complaints with them recently. So it's definitely something that we're seeing more of. But if you take the time as a business to invest in trying to ensure that you're implementing good practices and that you're following those guidelines and your teams are able to implement it, it's going to be a lot less expensive than waiting until some point that a court or a government agency tells you that you have to. So it's just being proactive is a great way to try and see that you're being responsible, but also you're meeting the needs of more of your potential customers. About 1 in 5 people has a disability, depending on how you count that, based on which survey and census and country. But that's a lot of customers, and if you want to be able to expand your reach to be able to provide access to more customers, then it really makes sense to try and follow those best practices so that you're able to, even for business reasons alone, be able to meet the guidelines around accessibility and sustainability.
So, in a nutshell, companies should be always proactive instead of waiting until they will face mandatory reporting requirements, right?
Absolutely. It's a lot. And web developers are much less expensive than lawyers. So being proactive and listening to your customers and being truly a user first company that's doing really listening carefully to the needs of all of your customers is something that can go a long ways to both meet the regulations, but also to have a more profitable fiscal year.
Got it. You talk about accessibility a lot. So, accessibility is a major part of your work. Why accessibility is essential while building internal ESG tools, emission portals, or data submission platforms?
I think that accessibility is it's part of humanity. Is that if you realize that as part of being human, we all have disabilities at some point. We're raised in this, or we come to this world and we can't even walk, and we have to learn how to go off and to read. We're having to as we get older, our abilities change. And when you're older than 30, suddenly you're needing to worry about your eyesight in a lot of cases. You and I are both wearing glasses,
Like
which
in
is a
our
form of
case.
assistive technology. Like these are examples of where we are human, and there are things that we, as part of being human, we need to be aware of how humans are and build towards the reality of the diversity of human experience. Now, 1 in 5 people has a disability, as I said. Those aren't always visible. So, we both have glasses, but there may be other disabilities that are hidden from us. For example, I've only ever seen you on Zoom here, so I have no idea if you have legs or not. All I can see is from the chest down. So we make assumptions about people's abilities. But even if we were in the same room together, I wouldn't be able to determine whether or not you were colorblind or had cognitive disabilities. Or there's a lot of things that we assume based on people's presentation and how they communicate. But those assumptions are often incorrect. I was spending some time in the TPAC conference and the WC3's big annual conference in Japan, and spending some time with somebody who only had, I think it was 10 or 15% of vision in one eye, and that's not a lot of vision. But he's legally blind, but I wouldn't have known it by spending time with him, because just he has enough vision to function in most day-to-day things. So we make assumptions about people's abilities, and often those assumptions are wrong. So when you're building an ESG tool, keeping in mind that a lot of your potential users or administrators may have disabilities you're not aware of. There's also all of the abilities we have today might be gone tomorrow. Like there's a friend of mine who got into an accident and became quadriplegic, and is still involved in the tech field, but it certainly changed his outlook to suddenly be in a situation based on an accident where he suddenly is not able to use his arms in a way that he used to. And this is something where we all assume that the abilities we have today are the same ones we're going to have tomorrow, but we know statistically that that's not the case. That we are mortal beings, and our biology goes off and changes over time, and our bodies deteriorate and break. And we don't want to come to terms with that, but that is the reality of things. The other side is that there's temporary and situational disabilities as well. So times where, let's say, your allergy season, like when there's a lot of pollen in the air, I have trouble seeing as clearly in the morning as other times, because there's the pollen has gotten into my eyes, and it takes me a while to clear that out. But other times that's not the case. Or if you bring your phone outside on a beautiful sunny day, and you're enjoying the sunshine, well, it's harder to go into to see the screen than if you're in a climate controlled environment like most of our offices. So trying to accommodate people in the way that they practically use technology today.
Got it. And I think for most of companies, accessibility becomes a real bottleneck when they try to scale or, for example, prepare for reporting.
It can be a real problem, especially because people tend to leave it to the end.
Hmm.
You build it into your agile process. If it's something that if every member of your team who's involved in delivering their digital product is knows what their responsibilities are, and that a designer makes sure that color contrast is something that is met before it moves to engineering, and that you're not trying to address everything just prior to launch. You're able to build into the process the aspects of quality into the work you're doing. Then it is something that is much easier, because you're doing it every step of the way, and you're not waiting till the end to sort of do the accessibility audit. This is part of how good work is being done.
So once again, being proactive rather than leaving everything at last minute.
Exactly, and making sure that people know what they're responsible for, and having clarity about the expectations of the team. This is documented in more detail in the WC3's Accessible Roles and Responsibilities Mapping, or ARM. So this is a set of recommendations that Denis Boudreau and others have been putting together with as part of the WC3 for a number of years, and I'm part of the group that's putting this together.
Now let's move to digital sustainability. So you have been discussing digital sustainability for a very long time. When companies focus mainly on emissions, what does digital sustainability mean in practical terms, including, let's say, principles from the W3C, Sustainable Web Standards and Guidelines?
So we're not at this stage thinking all that much about the environmental impact of our digital lives, but our digital lives do have an impact. I've got two screens like that those take power to run those two screens. There's also the execution of web pages. Like the average web page now is larger than the initial download of the video game Doom. So if you may have in the 90s, downloaded and played that interactive multiplayer first person shooter game, and it's just bizarre that video game is smaller than the average web page that's being delivered today, especially given the content isn't that complicated. But we're adding JavaScript libraries and the CSS frameworks, and we're adding more and more and more to the weight of our pages, because it's just easier to add more and assume that there'll be more bandwidth and there'll be more infrastructure that we will add to go off and make our pages run faster, rather than taking the time to actually build a performant website that is thinking about the impacts of the users. So often a developer will build their website on a super fast machine on a high bandwidth with connection, and not realize that not all of their users are going to have that luxury of being able to have both a newer machine and fast bandwidth. And if you're trying to navigate a web page on a cell connection in a rural community, you can have a lot of difficulty doing that. So just from a usability perspective, that's a problem. But it's also an environmental problem, because you have all this information that's getting shifted back and forth. You've got all these processes which are being done on the device itself. So so much JavaScript, so many web pages now have a lot of JavaScript which is executed on the client side in the browser, and that wears down battery life of devices. It is often being managed in spaces that are less ideal than what you can get in a data center. Like you can pick a data center that has it's running with renewable energy 24/7, and that's great, but you're not going to be able to do that for your users. Your users are going to use whatever power source they have in order to go off and power their devices. So if they're using the bog standard coal power plants from eastern the US, that's what you're going to get, and you don't have any choices around that. The other side is that so much of the energy that goes, or the CO2 isn't actually used in the electrical consumption of the device. It's in the embedded carbon of the devices itself. All of our technology takes energy to create, and our phones are highly resource intensive. They take a lot of water, they take a lot of energy to go off and to build to mine the resources and to refine them into something that creates our digital lives. And we buy these devices as if they're throwaway machines, and then when the new iPhone gets released, we toss the old one and get a new one. That has a huge environmental cost, and then we're not one that we're doing very much to address. But the more you're building your websites to expect that your users have the latest processors, and the harder it is to go and to keep those older machines running longer. So we can do a lot more as developers to make sure that people continue to use those older devices, which should be able to deliver sufficient processing for basic web browsing.
And going to the first part, I think that if it will be possible for companies to exactly track down where their, for example, energy is coming from, whether this is like 100% renewable,
Right.
the more companies will follow and start taking care of it.
Certainly if it's part of the metrics that they're reporting against, if it's what people are asking about, if people are ensuring that the companies are doing their due diligence to source their and control what they can control. With a lot of digital, the challenges are actually that you're not dealing with scope 1 or scope 2 issues, you're dealing with scope 3 issues, that the actual the largest environmental impact comes from the use of the technology, not in its production.
The W3C Sustainable Web Standards and Guidelines outline ways to reduce the environmental impact of digital services. So, in your view, which parts of this framework are the most relevant for ESG or compliance systems?
So the frameworks are built to try and address different roles within the digital process. So there's sections on building websites, there's sections on usability, there's a section on infrastructure, but there's also a section that's dealing with business business decisions and business needs. And this is something that is difficult in many ways for the WC3 since it's more of many of the existing standards are more technical, but we do want to go off and remind people that business decisions do actually have an environmental impact, and that you have to think about where those priorities are, and how the decisions are being made for for the guidelines. I think that's the area which the ESGs probably should be focusing on, because these are decisions which are made more by some of the decisions are made more by for the ESGs are made by the business owners. You're not necessarily going to go off and to have your graphic designers involved in making those business decisions. If you're a really small company, that's going to be what's happening. Whoever knows the information will do it. But in a larger organization, you're going to want to have your front end people be able to focus in on how to deliver an accessible and sustainable and performant website. But you want to have your leadership team be able to think about how do we set the policies and the frameworks to ensure that we are recycling our e-waste, that we're thinking about how we engage with their clients, and that we engage with their suppliers, and that we're thinking about all of the other elements that are key to building a sustainable digital presence.
Thank you very much for the clarification. I think it should help organizations understand where to begin rather than trying to apply everything at once and then fail.
Yes, we really want to go on, and whoever looks at the web sustainability guidelines, the goal is not to go off the goal is to address all of it, but we do want people to start where they are, and to start with what they can act on immediately. So to take the time to look at what the guidelines are, to look at what their business is and what their role is within that business, and then be able to decide how to act within that in order to ensure that every day that they have time to look at this, they're able to go off and to make their impact a little bit less on the environment than it currently is.
Currently, many companies rely on custom portals or spreadsheets for emissions reporting. How can the sustainable web guidelines be applied when designing or improving these types of internal tools?
I mean, partly it's with the internal tools, it's a challenge to evaluate how sustainable they are. Often the tools that we use for an internal tool are not things that are as easy to evaluate because there's a password within it, or because it's always the easiest to go off and evaluate the public facing code that you have, because that's something that is generally more more visible, and anyone can access and evaluate that code base. Spreadsheets are generally pretty low intensity in terms of the environmental impact, because they're static files that are processed. You're working with them within a single application and not trying to run an entire website around that. But in terms of the platforms themselves, if you've got an intranet site or a portal that people log into through a platform, again, it's important to try and make sure that is accessible, that it's performant, that you're building into your process, into your CI/CD pipeline, a process to evaluate that you're not introducing either additional friction into the user experience, that with slower pages or inaccessible sites or inaccessible functions, and that as your portal continues to evolve, that you're working to follow those best practices in order to better serve your users. I also try and encourage people to build a feedback loop. How do you try and make sure that you're able to make sure that your customers understand that you want to have their feedback in order to improve the experience? So if you have an accessibility statement in the foot of your web page, and you're responsive to your users, if they run into a problem, they will get they'll be able to go off and to leave a comment on your website or in this feedback form, to be able to say, this didn't work for me and I would like to have it fixed because I can't do X. So these are things that you can open up and try and engage more with your members, so you can address those issues. With sustainability, it's a bit harder because there's not an individual with agency who can go off and participate, but you can do things like set up quarterly review of your pages, or be able to do, again, with CI/CD testing. You can run page weight or page performance analysis for your pages, or even just see, when your metrics, how long does it take for your content to load? How long does it take for your users to navigate through your interface? And if that changes over time and gets longer over time, then that might be a reason that maybe you're adding too much JavaScript into the process. Maybe they're having more difficulty using the portal in order to go off and to complete the task that they came there for. And ultimately, no matter how beautiful your portal is, people want to accomplish the task and move off and do something else, because they have a long list of other things that they would like to get on to, or that they need to do. And completing the ESG's forms on your portal are not in the top priority of things that most people want to spend their time doing.
So it looks that spreadsheets are not going away in anytime soon for now.
No, spreadsheets will be here probably forever, and they're an accessible format. Their performance, I don't see them going anywhere.
Now let's talk about interoperability. So interoperability has been a recurring topic in your work. How does the lack of interoperability affect emissions reporting, supply chain data collection, or regulatory submissions?
So much comes down to having that transparency. If you have tools that are committed to an open standard, and then you can import and export information from a different tool and evaluate it. If you're building tools that are open source, then again, somebody can rerun the tool or the analysis in their own environment and be able to determine whether or not the data that they're getting is the same, or if they can evaluate flaws in your analysis much more easily if they have access to the software. It's something that is, I think, quite useful in terms of quickly being able to iterate. I think the climate is such a critical issue that we need to be able to move together quickly in a direction that sees us be able to have impacts at scale. And if we're constantly reinventing the wheel, and firms are constantly having to go off and to rebuild the same widget, there will be a negative environmental impact, and there will be innovations that we're going to have to wait years or even longer for people to recreate, to learn from each other, to experiment. And if we simply were working in the open collaboratively together, even as competing agencies, I think we'd be able to get further ahead. And so much of the opportunity I see is in companies being able to provide better quality services through either knowledge of the network, or of being able to knowledge of the clients. There's a lot that you can compete on based on the knowledge and care of service delivery, but to not necessarily try and lock in a customer onto a proprietary platform that stops them from being able to get necessarily the best service for their limited budgets as well.
From our perspective at Net Zero Compare, when we cooperate with companies, we see constantly a lot of like manual fixes and workarounds because systems, let's say, do not talk to each other.
Yeah. And they have to, and it's like it's so much of, if you don't have a standard, if people aren't building to a standard and committing to that standard, then you're trying to have consistent results from year after year is going to be that much more difficult, because somebody applied a manual fix one year, but they went on to another position, the next year, and they weren't there or they forgot to apply the fix, or they applied a slightly different patch, or trying to have consistent results because people do not have standards compliant data and processes is a real challenge. We're also part of the Digital Public Goods Alliance, and have been we're not members of them, but we've been very supportive of the digital public goods process, and have had work to go off and have some of our open source tools certified. And they are tools that also include documentation and ensuring that they're respecting the best practices of privacy and security, which again are really important when you're dealing with this kind of information. You don't want to mistakenly be passing forward personally identifiable information through your data as you're exchanging information between systems. That there are certainly some things that you want to be able to hold and hold confidentially for privacy and security reasons.
A lot of ESG platforms and compliance portals are complicated to use, unfortunately. What are the most common design or usability issues you see in these systems?
I think that in general, these tools they're designed so that people are designing them in order for people to live and work and spend a lot of time learning how the systems work. And most people don't. Like, they might do it once or twice a year, but they're going to have to be relearning the system as much as possible. So trying to have a standard vocabulary, having a simple process for navigation, taking the time to do the user research to make sure that like there's a tool called TreeJack, for instance, which is really quite useful to go off and say, well, where are people going to expect to find the information? What are people looking for? That type of work is often, the user research work is often underutilized. So a designer or developer will put up what they think is as the structure of the site, but not necessarily taking the time to actually understand the user's perspective, especially a new user's perspective. And so that's something that I think is often overlooked with so many portals, and just also the complexity of the information. Sometimes people do actually just want to have the information that they can download in a spreadsheet and evaluate it themselves. They don't necessarily need to have all of the whiz bangs built into a custom portal. If you can provide people the basic information and give them instructions on how to interact with it, with a spreadsheet, or with for that matter AI. There's lots of ways that AI can help you understand the data better. But rather than building an overly complicated interface, if you can provide a simpler interface that just gives people the power that they need to be able to access the data in a meaningful way, I think that's really one of the ways. Also, just uses of APIs. People should be able to access information and incorporate it into their own systems if they have the technical capacity to do so. They shouldn't be restrained to the platform if they want to go off and incorporate it with other tools. I think that there's a real potential to be able to get more value from one of these platforms by having an API that allows a team with developers to be able to incorporate it into existing workflows.
For APIs, not only technical limitations, but also very often budgetary constraints because APIs might be very, very expensive.
Yeah, oh, they're getting cheaper to set up and cheaper to maintain. I mean, if the processes are definitely becoming more commoditized, so I think it's easier to do a lot of this right now. So again, maintaining it's another issue, and documenting it is a whole other interface to go off and to be thinking about. and there's security implications with that as well. It's worth reaching out to clients to see if it's something that would be of value to them to have access to their data through an API.
That's true. Probably with the use of AI, it should be even easier and cheaper to create
Yeah,
those APIs nowadays. I
yeah,
also think that usability often gets overlooked until the data starts actually coming in and after the teams feel the impact.
right. Yes, absolutely. It's there's nothing quite as real as if you're imagining an interface of any sort without data, that's completely different than it's like, what is the user actually looking for? What is the meaning, the data that that would be useful for them, and how do you try and give them what they're looking for? Because often it's not what a team is going to think of about the important things of the data model that they're building.
You often raise the importance of ethical technology. So, how should ethics factor into the development of tools used for emissions reporting or public transparency?
That ethics is really quite important. I'm written a chapter in a book on ethics and accessibility that will be released next year, I think in March. It's just recently announced. But I think that the ethics is important because it's the foundation of trust. It's the foundation of how we work together as business. Business doesn't work effectively if there isn't an ethical agreement for how transactions and how humans interact with each other. So I think it is really quite important to have an ethical framework for how we deal with each other and how we deal with important issues like ESG and accessibility, because this is about relationships to people and to the planet. I think that if we need to have trust with our employees and with our clients, and for that matter with our regulators, and so making sure that we're acting in an ethical way and clearly following those guidelines is something that I think will help build the trust with all of the different parties that businesses need to interact with.
That's a very good point. I included actually this question because ethics is rarely included in discussions about sustainability software, but I think it should be.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this because we believe in the ethics of collaborating together for having a common life on this planet, working together in a way that, I mean, ethics is critical to that.
For companies with limited resources, what is the most realistic first step to improve accessibility in their sustainability reporting systems?
There's lots of wonderful tools out there that can help make it easier for everyone to be able to have more accessible interfaces. And in fact, there's better tools out there for looking at sustainability as well. One of the easiest that does both is looking at Google Lighthouse. Google Lighthouse you can use it within your CI/CD pipeline for your developers to have active testing and monitoring. The other nice thing is it has a beautiful report that you can sort of use as a snapshot of a time frame, and that's also quite useful. There's other tools as well. I mean, Google Lighthouse for accessibility uses Axe, which is an open source tool built by DQ, which is an accessibility company. But there's other tools that are also using Axe that I would recommend. Microsoft's Accessibility Insights is quite useful. That's a tool that's open source, and Microsoft contributes back to the DQ Axe environments that they're working as a responsible company to be able to build open source best practices. But there's a really nice way to be able to test individual pages and to be able to also to create reports of accessibility issues and file them in your issue tracker, whether that's in Jira or GitHub or wherever. The biggest challenge that people often have when reporting accessibility issues is how do you replicate it? And this is the case for almost any bug. If you run across a bug, how do you make sure that a developer can quickly understand what the problem is and what they need to do to replicate that problem? So Accessibility Insights is quite useful for that. All these tools are they're like training wheels. So for Google Lighthouse, for instance, you can get 100% on a Google Lighthouse score for accessibility, and that does not mean your website is 100% accessible. All it means is that 100% of the tests that are written for Google Lighthouse have passed when running your page. So it's an evaluation of the tests that Google Lighthouse is able to do. There's a lot of tests that are not you cannot automate for accessibility. So there are things that are these automated tests are going to miss. And then for that matter, there's going to be issues that some of these tests or some of these tools report that are not actually issues, like false positives are what they're called. So you need to be able to be aware that these automated tools have some real strengths and advantages, particularly when dealing with scale. But they're not going to give you an accessible website. They're going to give you a roadmap to go off and to fix the accessibility issues you have, but not necessarily provide you assurance that your website is completely accessible. I'd put it in terms of thinking like there's a famous portrait with a Cessna pipe. This is not a pipe. It's a painting of a pipe, but it's not a pipe. It's a painting
Mhm.
of a pipe. There's also the idea that the map is not the terrain. These are useful tools to learn how to make your website more accessible for people. But it's really how does your where the rubber hits the road is when people are accessing your website and people with disabilities in particular. And the automated tools are a great way to get you started so that as your understanding matures, as you get more familiar with the best practices that are part of the web sustainability or the web accessibility guidelines, that you're able to look at responding to them more effectively. But they're like training wheels for people to understand accessibility best practices.
Plus, those tools I think should be straightforward enough for the teams to implement without any planning cycles, at
Yeah.
least long planning cycles.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like maybe that you don't have your development pipeline set up for proper DevOps. So adding a tool like Google Lighthouse might be more difficult, or people might be using tools like Pally, which is was another sort of common runner which people use. But it shouldn't take that much time to go from to set these up as part of an automated development process, or for that matter, training and onboarding so that people understand what are the next steps that they should be doing.
Before we wrap up, is there anything important we didn't cover that you would like to highlight?
I think that the most important thing here is that with both web accessibility and web sustainability, the goal is to be a little bit better today than you were yesterday, and to not stress out over perfection. You're never going to have a perfect website, just like you're never going to have a completely secure website. Like these are things that are they're ideals that we can strive for, and there are best practices we can follow, but that idea of a perfectly accessible or perfectly sustainable interface just does not exist. So take this as a journey. Realize that there's a lot more to learn throughout the whole process of building and engaging your websites, and that there's a community of people for both accessibility and sustainability that want to help you learn better practices and find ways for you to be able to improve the performance and availability of your web content. And that these are community-driven initiatives that always require new people, and that there's always room for new people to join in. So if you're interested in something and you want to step up and learn more, there's lots of communities that are looking for volunteers who would be interested in having you be part of them.
I totally agree, and thank you. That adds a clear final takeaway. Mike, thank you for sharing your insights on accessibility, open standards, interoperability, and the sustainable web guidelines. These topics are becoming increasingly important for organizations that depend on digital tools for sustainability reporting and regulatory compliance. So, this conversation will be published on Net Zero Compare, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel and major podcast platforms. We really appreciate your time and the perspective you brought to this discussion today.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you so much, Mike.